person who can tell us whether the cockle season is really taking off or not is our first speaker, Martin Wood from IRI. I've known Martin for a very long time. He not only provides the baseline information for everything to do with the OTC side of the industry, he's the person I call when Colette McCready or somebody else from the MHRA asks me for figures about the OTC market. He never fails to respond at the speed of light, and he's been an invaluable partner to PHB for many years. So I'm very delighted to introduce him today. So Martin, over to you. Tell us about the market.
Thank you very much to everyone, to Sheila and for inviting me today. Okay, so my name's Martin Wood. I'm from a company called IRI. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a American-owned organisation, and our core business is, I guess, market data. So continuous market tracking data. We do econometrics, analytics, data integration and things like that as well. But I know the theme of today, the customer is king, hopefully, and our customers are manufacturers and retailers, certainly from the UK perspective. What am I going to talk to you about today? Well, I'd like to cover three things. I'm going to throw some numbers at you, because everyone likes us to throw numbers at them. But we're more than that. We're about providing insight. As the strapline says, it's trying to deliver growth to our clients. So if we can help you as an industry deliver growth, then I think we're doing our job. So I'm throwing some numbers. I want to provide some insight and link that to the theme of today. And finally, I'm going to talk about a specific industry matter, e-cigarettes, which I've got a few numbers to share with you, and I think that actually throws quite a lot of light on some of the broader issues we're talking about in terms of meeting customer needs and what the future of pharmacy is. So that's what I want to cover off. So I've got a little agenda-ette of how I'm going to go through things, but don't worry about that. I'll talk you through them as we go along. So my first chart, I'll throw a bit of spaghetti at you all. This is simply one chart just to summarise what's happening with the recession in the economy. So we've got a few metrics there. All I really want to bring out to you is the fact that the gap between earnings growth and prices has been quite big. In other words, people have had less money to spend. But that's coming down. If you move over to the right, to the most recent quarters, you'll see that that gap's been shrinking, and forecasts are that actually some people will actually have more disposable income this year. The other key point to bring out of all these big sort of macro points about the recession, and I'm not going to go on and on about macroeconomics, is that it's about individuals. So for every individual that's got a shortfall in income, there's someone else who's paid off the mortgage or has got a low interest rate to pay and is in employment and has got plenty of disposable income. So clearly it's different for individuals. But there's no doubt that we've had tough times, and when I show you a chart later on about retail trends, you'll see how that's making some big changes to the retail marketplace that pharmacy operates within. So this chart's nice and simple, and it shows the size of the OTC market in the UK, which is blue, in units. I mean, units is the best way of just simply measuring how many packs are sold, how much medicine is being sold OTC. So the blue numbers, I'll just read them there. It's hard to see actually. So we're talking about just under 1 billion packs OTC, and then the yellow bar is prescription sales, which kindly our friends at IMS have given me, because we measure sales out of stores. So most of the numbers I'm showing you today are going to be total retail sales in the UK, Great Britain, measured as what shops sell. But IMS measure prescriptions are dispensed, and then the little bar in the middle there are products which are licensed as P or GSL and therefore could be sold OTC but are actually sold on the doctor's prescription, and we get that number from IMS as well, whereas we deliver a clean OTC read. So after this chart, the numbers I show are all going to be actual OTC sales and excludes any prescriptions. So as you can see, from a trending perspective, from a year-on-year basis, the total market is flat in terms of OTC, drifting down slightly, and the reason it's gone down a bit is simply we had a very strong cold flu season at the end of 2012, and although in fact it was quite strong this year as well, compared with the average, it's down year on year. And because when you measure packs, things like medicated confectionery are very low priced, high volume products, it always impacts on the volume. So the market, generally speaking, as measured by us, is flat, and we can see prescription sales are still growing. And so this myth that doctors are trying to prescribe less, and everything we're doing as an industry to encourage self-medication, the long-term trend has been for prescriptions to increase and for the OTC market to be fairly flat. And so that's the big sort of background to everything we're talking about. When we compare the health market with the rest of FMCG, actually it's doing okay. And in fact, the last couple of years, and this segues nicely into my next chart, which shows the long-term trend of our measured OTC market, you can see that it has been growing pretty much through the noughties, but in the last few years has been pretty flat. But last 2 years we've seen a bit of growth, only just about or over inflation, but at least it's growing a little bit, and I'll explain what the drivers are of growth that we've seen in the last couple of years. Okay, last year, I've just mentioned, year on year was a bit poor in terms of winter seasonal sales, but we did have the hottest, driest, sunniest summer since 2006. We might have the wettest February, but we had a very hot summer, and so here are just a few pictures for you. If we turn that into numbers, because we like numbers at IRI, this plots weekly temperature with the last year in red and the latest year, in other words 2012 in red, 2013 in green, and you can see where the week year on year differences are. So that the pink is where it was hotter in 2012, and the green is where it was hotter in 2013. And if I've done the same thing for sunshine hours and rainfall, and you can see you have 3 distinct strong peaks where it was much better weather in 2013 compared with 2012. And all I'm now going to do is superimpose hay fever sales, and you can see how responsive hay fever is to effectively weather. I know it's pollen, I know it's complicated, but there's a very strong correlation between weather and sales of major OTC categories. If you look at the total OTC market in value terms, you can see how those peaks shine through in the 2013 sales, and you can see that the December peak's not quite as big. I mean, if I showed you I don't want to make the chart too complicated, but the 2012 picture would show a stronger December peak for the total market. And then just as an analogy or comparison, if we look at sun care, which you'd expect, so there's suntan creams and so on, it's no more or less seasonal than hay fever, and it's no more or less responsive to good weather conditions. So it just gives you a flavour of that. So, having established how seasonal the market is, and clearly the year-on-year trends always have a lot to do with what the weather's been like. If we look at what's been driving the market over the last year, you can see that the biggest driver is on the other sector, which is basically the three things that have driven growth the most: hay fever, as we've already seen, topical pain relief, and smoking cessation. That means OTC smoking cessation. These numbers do not include e-cigarettes, but I'll come on to that. But all the markets are going up slightly, mainly with inflation, but it's flat. If we look at the same categories, so we're looking at the main areas of OTC. I hope you can read all these charts, but basically this is showing a 10-year trend. So it's the blue line, the blue bars are what was sold in 2003, the red bars 2013, and as you can see, all the sectors have grown, but it's the other sector that's grown the most, and it's grown by 50% in 10 years, and the other sector is largely driven by smoking control and hay fever. So the other point I'd like to make is that vitamins has grown by 19%, but most of that growth has been in the last few years. So actually, one of the things that's been underpinning the growth of the total OTC market has been the retail improvement sales in, not sure that sounded very good, but the sales in retail outlets of vitamins and minerals. That's grown very strongly. By the way, just so that you know, internet sales through the major multiples and through the channels that we include in our universe are included in these numbers. Okay, a couple of quick charts on own label, because own label, or retailer own brand as we should probably call it, is a very important part of the OTC market. I've compared year-on-year trends for last year and this year for some of the main FMCG sectors from our data, and as you can see, in value terms, own brand accounts for about 20% of value spent, but in packs, in volume, it's actually the most own label dominated sector of FMCG, and it's because we have in the OTC market such a high proportion of retailer brands, which are, it's an argument as to, and this will include brands which are really sold for the trust that the retailer has, as well as products which are more generic in style. So we've got a high proportion of own label products sold in the OTC market. Okay, I've got one chart just showing P and GSL, and I'm going to move now into new products briefly, and looking at how the injection of new products, new life, new branding gives life to a market. P and GSL over 10 years, so again I've got two 10-year bars, so 10 years ago and now. The ones on the left are the P category, so those are the pharmacy-only medicines that have to be sold via protocols including a pharmacist. We've got the GSL sector, which is open sale, and then those added together with unlicensed products, which will be mainly vitamins, makes the total market. And you can see the total market's gone up 20% over 10 years. P sales are down by a third, and GSL's up by just over a third. So you can see how that trend has been really clear. P accounted for 35% of the OTC market 10 years ago, now it only accounts for 15%. So that's really quite important, and it's a function basically of the lack of switches into the P category from prescription only. There have been some switches, but they've not worked, not in terms of generating OTC sales to any sort of substantial degree. So we've had products like Zocor, Flomax and so on which have switched but haven't worked from an OTC perspective compared with some of the long-standing switches. There are exceptions, of course. Voltarol's doing really well, but in terms of impact on the total market, the switching has all been internal within the OTC market from P to GSL, and that's a large explanation of these trends. So if we look at categories like antifungals, which 10 years ago would have been quite strongly P, they'll now be GSL. Okay, the contribution of new product development to the total market is really small. If I showed you a chart for toiletries, we'd be expecting between 5 and 10% of the market to be contributed by products launched in the previous year. It's under 1% for medicines. Here's an example of the products launched in the last year, and I show you them because in most cases they're line extensions. They are new features, possibly new indications or new formulations or longer lasting of brands that we're already familiar with. Some of the biggest brands, the biggest brand is being Nurofen and a cold and flu variant, and that's great. But when we add these all together, it's not adding a lot of real newness to the market, and that is one of the reasons why the market's flat. I'll put this one on at the bottom. It's just been launched, and it's Reckitt Benckiser are now active in the vitamins market, so we'll be interested to see what happens there. That's just been launched, so it's too early to call on numbers. Right, now, very interesting chart. I've borrowed this chart from our friends at Kantar World Panel. We've got all this data, but we're not allowed to show actual retailer sales, whereas this data is generated from household consumption panel, so individuals buying as opposed to shops selling. And this chart shows a 20-year trend, so 1993 through 2003 to 2013, and it shows the shares for each of the major grocery retailers of healthcare OTC sales, compared with the red bar there, which is independent pharmacy, and the blue at the top, which is others. And so the key point to pull out of a chart like this is, firstly, you know, what a magnificent job Boots have done to keep their share at around 30% over that entire period. And I know that there's been acquisitions of smaller pharmacy chains and things as part of that, but that's an incredible achievement given the growth of the major multiples in so many other sectors of the economy. I mean, you can see how the light blue line of Tesco has grown. And you can also see how independent pharmacy sales shrunk during the 90s. But the main point I want to make is, out of this chart, is how stable things have been for the last 3, 4, 5 years. So what's happened is, first of all, the sale of independent pharmacies to multiples to a degree has dried up. So we're seeing a resurgence in numbers, or resurgence, certainly no more decline in numbers of independent pharmacies. And secondly, I think the focus in pharmacy has crystallised a little bit. We've seen, and I'm sure we'll get onto this with the other speakers, we've seen how the pharmacy channel has moved into consultation and perhaps selling less of the traditional chemist goods. Obviously, it's still, you know, 85–90% prescription sales for lots of pharmacies, but we are seeing more focus. We're not seeing the numbers decline, and we're also seeing the major multiple grocers not acquiring pharmacies at the rate that they were in the previous decade. And so when you add all that together, actually we've got on the high street a strong presence of pharmacy. And then I'll move to my next chart, which talks really, and I've got this chart really just to show how the sort of high street's working now, where this is a chart again borrowed from Kantar, which shows household income across the x-axis, across the bottom, average age there. So basically, the top of the market is younger purchasers, and the bottom of the chart is older purchasers. Over on that side, it's more affluent. Over on this side, it's less affluent. So what we're really saying is these retailers, I don't know if you can see them all, but all your pound shops and a lot of pharmacy chains are all in the older, poorer sector of the market. And most of the grocery multiples, including, interestingly, people like Aldi, are over on the younger and more affluent side. So that chart would have had Aldi much further down in the past, and it's just an indication of how a store like that is changing its consumer base. But the major point I want to make is that we have got the high street is largely selling to this poorer, older segment. Okay. My final point, and I'm just checking how I'm doing for time. How are we doing, guys? Are we all right for time? Yep, excellent. Okay. I mean, I'm happy to take questions if there's time for them at the end of this. Okay, so I'm going to finish off with a little bit about e-cigarettes. Now, I won't spend any time talking too much about what they are and how they work. I'm hoping and assuming that people are familiar with what they are. Now, we talk about the customer. The customer is king. These products have been available in the major multiples for the last 2 or 3 years. So even a store like Waitrose, and I know we've got John Lewis speaking here today, Waitrose is a store which prides itself on the quality of its products. And it's been stocking these products since 2011. And all these multiple retailers have had e-cigarettes for sale. If we look at the non-major multiple sectors, we see that Boots still don't stock these. Wilkinson's do not stock these. Superdrug have been trialling, but actually for the last year or so have been. And we've now seen that Lloyd's Pharmacy is taking e-cigarettes as part of their range. So it's interesting, isn't it, that, and I can't debate it myself here, but I'm suggesting that we need to look at a product which is clearly meeting a consumer need in an area where pharmacy has got something to say, is being stocked by pharmacies, but not by many. And the really interesting thing, of course, is you all want to look at a few numbers. So this is a new market which has come out of nowhere. So what I'm going to show you is three bunches of numbers. Sales of e-cigarettes measured through our IRI universe. So we are talking here about the major FMCG players, pharmacy, grocery and so on. What we're not measuring, of course, is every little market stall and little fly-by-night e-cigarette shop that's just up. So these numbers I'm going to show you are going to be underestimates, not overestimates. So I'm going to show you the e-cigarette sales. I'm going to show you our smoking cessation numbers that are already included in our OTC read. And then I've also got some numbers from IMS which show prescription sales of stop smoking treatments. So those are products like Nicorette, Nicotinell and so on that are prescribed, but also include products like Champix, which are sold as part of an NHS stop smoking treatment. So 3 years worth of sales, so that's 2011. You can see e-cigarettes were selling nothing really through the major outlets. They might have been selling a little bit. And the OTC market for smoking cessation, it's about £125 million. And then it's a bit difficult with prescription to get a value figure, but the figure I've got from IMS is about £75 million for 3 years ago. We then see the NRT market growing a bit, stop smoking market for prescription growing a bit, and e-cigarettes suddenly about £25 million. In the last year, it's nearly 100 million. And this is going through, you know, the major chains. Remember, Boots don't stock these products. Most of the pharmacies not stocking them. Interestingly, the OTC smoking cessation market is still growing. Now, whether that will carry on or not, who's to know? But it's clear that most of the people going into e-cigarettes are smokers wanting to cut back, cut down, have a product which can be consumed more easily because it's not distributing carcinogenics, we think, to children or whatever. So I've put a couple more projections on, and these are contentious because these aren't our actual numbers, these are just projections. But in a year or two, based on our judgment of what's happened in other markets, based on what's happened just trending from the numbers. I mean, even if we've got that completely wrong for NRT, smoking cessation, OTC, and they're flat or they drop a little bit, I still think it's reasonable to say that this is a market that could be twice the size, e-cigarettes. Bearing in mind the size of the cigarette market is more like sort of 15–20 billion pounds. So this still represents, even 300 million pounds, represents a pinprick in the context of the total tobacco market. And those are the numbers that are really interesting. But if you think that this total OTC market, £2.3 billion, £300 million represents a big chunk, given how flat everything is, all I'm really trying to say is here's a consumer need in an area where pharmacists have authority. It's an enormous opportunity, and these numbers give you an idea of the scale of it. So that's really the main point I want to leave you with. So I've got a summary here of the points I've made about the total market. I think these charts are going to be made available anyway. So that concludes my bit. So it's a bit of food for thought, I think.